agenda as presented. Moved, seconded. All those in favor? Opposed, carried. Okay. I'd like to acknowledge that we are privileged to gather on the traditional territory of the Kwakwaka'wakw. I missed that, apologies. We'll go straight to item 7A. We have the harbor rate changes. This is brought for you for information. Staff heard that council would like ample time to consider these things, and it will be on the regular scheduled meeting January 11th. However, Rebecca is available today if anyone has any questions for her. I have two actually. One on page 6 of 8, it says summer daily rate overnight. I noticed all of them, it says the current rate and then the average and then the proposed rate. And most of them are below average. So Rebecca, I was just wondering if on the overnight rate, so we are proposing to go above the average. It's the second line down on page 6 of 8. Or wait a minute. Is it 4 of 22? 4 of 22. Proposed rate changes for 2022 is the top title.
Yeah, so I'm proposing that we go just a little bit above what the average are, just because we do have lots of upcoming maintenance that's going to be due on our docks. So to try to get ahead of that and to make sure that we can afford to do the maintenance that's required.
Okay. And the other question I had was on page 6 of 22. I know this was controversial at one time. So we've got transient and Port McNeill resident. And transient is considered anyone who does not live within the town of Port McNeill.
Yes.
And we're still considering High Creek and Impish Heights to be outside of, because, yeah.
Yes.
And was there any dialogue, just out of curiosity's sake, perhaps if Councillor Barron's there, was there any discussion around the harbor committee table around that, or none?
No, I don't think they mentioned it at all.
Okay, thanks. That's the only questions I had. Any other questions for Rebecca?
We did have discussions around the resident, but we weren't sure. I'm not, it might have been at a meeting Rebecca wasn't at there, whether we actually had a resident as defined by the Elections Act and then had a North Island resident as opposed to then a transient for outside of town. But it was just bantered. It never really came to a conclusion.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Cole?
Thank you, Mayor Worship. Yeah, Rebecca, I was wondering, we have live aboard services rate mentioned a few times in here. So we currently don't allow live aboards. We do, or that?
So we do not allow liveaboards, but we do have 2 that were grandfathered in from previously. So the liveaboard services rate is basically just to cover their hydro, because hydro has gone up. So that includes their hydro, but it's only for the people who are being grandfathered in.
And has anyone done the math on, what 15 amp circuit going?
Yeah, that's where the $1,000 came from.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to ask was about the Schedule C mooring rules and regulations. That's either page 20 or 22. 1.2, a person shall not. So right at the bottom, it's got M and N. So M says shall not scrape, sand, or paint vessels in the water at these facilities. And then N says do repairs on a vessel in the water that can cause the introduction of any harmful substances to the water. So they're kind of the same thing. why do we have M specifically? Whether somebody's doing an oil change and they accidentally dump a bunch of oil in the water, bad, but they can still do an oil change. If somebody wants to paint their vessel, they take steps to not get things in the water. That, to me, that's the same thing. So we're either allowing work there, period. I don't know if you could just explain that.
So they do partially cover the same things. However, spray sand and paint is something that happens consistently that we're dealing with all the time. Whereas harmful substances can be as small as people who use dish soap to try to disguise, like oil spills that have happened. So it goes partially off of the definitions through Environment Canada.
That's, we refer to the Harbor Committee to possibly delete item M.
The Harbor Committee did have some discussion on advising.
Hang on, I gotta get a seconder for the motion before we can talk on it.
I'll second it so we can talk about it.
Okay, go ahead, Anne Marie, or Councillor Barron, sorry.
There was discussion at the Harbor Committee about the idea of a permit, and I'm sorry, Rebecca, I can't remember if you were at that meeting or not, but about some sort of a, in a forest industry, we would call it a pre-work. So basically there's a form that the town would have from the harbor, which would risk rate the activities that were being done, and then that person would be then providing how they were going to mitigate exactly M and N, the protections. And there wouldn't be, we weren't talking about a fee at being attached to it, but it was just more so that people were making the harbor staff aware. Again, it was something that we tossed around in the summer, but it never kind of went much further than that, because the people at the table really felt that it could be a pretty simple solution to making sure that our liabilities were covered.
I have a question on Councillor's Cole's motion. So M, scrape, sand, or paint vessels. What are the rules in other harbors, and why is this particularly an issue?
It refers right back into, and realistically, it is a duplication, where it does introduce harmful substances into the ecosystem of our harbor. It's also, there's also federal laws that prevents this from happening in water unless you have certain protections in place. So this is to help us mitigate the fact that they need to be going through the proper channels through the federal government to make sure that those procedures are in place.
I believe when we looked it up at the committee, the federal laws and the provincial laws both had the two lines. They had it differentiated with the sanding and scraping and painting from the introduction of the harmful substances. So it was just, it seemed like the rules were mirroring what the legislation was. But I mean, to send it back to the committee to have them take a look and look at the legislation, I don't have an issue with that.
And just a follow-up question on that. So if you do repairs on a vessel in the water that can cause introduction of any harmful substance on the water, to the water, that leaves the door open that they can do repairs if they present a plan and follow the federal guidelines, correct?
Yes.
So if scrape, sand, paint, if that isn't expressly forbidden in those federal guidelines, And what I think I hear you saying is, you know, if they had a plan in place to mitigate, they could do that. I believe what Councillor Cole is then getting at is that by us saying we shall not, that doesn't leave it open for them to come with a plan. Is that what you're getting to?
That is what I'm saying, and it's like, one part we're saying you can do repairs on your vessels, don't get in the water. Those repairs could be disastrous to the environment, but we trust them to do that, but we don't trust them to. And the way I read that, you can't even paint your boat inside of the boat. It says, if you're detailing inside of your boat, that's against the rules too, right? So.
Just one more thing, and then Councillor, Councillor Mitchell, so I guess unless federal policies or guidelines are followed, would be an easy fix to that particular one. Councillor Mitchell?
The rules that we make, and this is coming from fisheries, those are entirely up to us, what we want in our harbor. And we have to enforce what we want in our harbor. And the things that we do personally, you know, in other words, a town of Port McNeil working on their equipment, spilling something in the water, they're responsible for that. They're not responsible to enforce fisheries regulations. They're responsible to support activity. And I spoke at length with the fisheries enforcement people last year, and they were very clear that there were ways to paint and scrape and do repairs on boats without introducing deleterious substances to the water. And I've looked at numerous bylaws on many places along this coast. We have the most onerous, heavily enforced rules anywhere that I could find. And I think we need to lighten up because we've lost some couple of long-term mariners that used to come here every year. And they went over to Sontula this year because they weren't allowed to even lift a scraper or a paintbrush anywhere on their boat. So we need to take a really hard look at this. We're either marine friendly or we're not, and we're enforcing rules that aren't in our wheelhouse. We don't have to enforce every niggling federal fisheries law in our harbor. It's not our job. We're not the enforcement people for fisheries and oceans. So we need to be a little bit more flexible.
Yeah, I would probably beg to differ. I think that we could find a way to allow it following the federal guidelines, but the way I read the act, we have to at least meet the guidelines. Anyway. Okay, there's a motion on the table. Any other questions?
Could you read back the motion, please?
The motion I have is to submit items M and N to the Harbor Committee for review.
Did you catch that, Councillor Mitchell, or would you like that written down? Oh, you're muted, sorry.
Yeah, I'm good with that having been read back. I'm fine. Thanks.
All right, all those in favor? Oh, sorry.
I just have a question for it. What would be the intent? Review it to what purpose? That is not in the motion as to what the intent is behind. Because
The intent would be to remove or alter item N.
could we amend the motion to clarify the intention behind this?
Sounds good.
And would we be saying 1.2, or you're just specifically talking about M and N?
I would take the whole of 1.2.
Yeah, can we friendly amend that to 1.2 as opposed to just
Yep.
M and N?
We'll look at the whole thing.
With particular attention to M and N, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So then you have that, oh yeah, I guess you're not the, Harbor Committee liaison, so that would, you've got the intent of what council was looking for? Okay, great. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay. Any other questions, or can we move on to item 8A? Councilor Mitchell, did you have any questions? Other questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you very much, Rebecca, for being here to answer those questions. That's helpful. Will help our constituents on January 11th. Appreciate it. And thank you, staff, for putting that on the agenda. Bylaw 8A, review of proposed zoning bylaw 305/2021. Thank you, Kevin, for joining us today. We appreciate it. And I believe we were on CS2 zone, but I'm willing to be corrected. And that would be on page 44 of the old document, but 9.4 commercial service 2 CS2 zone.
To your worship, that is correct. That is what I had in my document also.
Okay.
If I may, based on our last discussion, the discussion was to actually remove the CS2 zone completely, as there are no properties in the community that are zoned. So the proposal at this stage that we had gotten to based on a mapping review was to remove the CS2 zone in entirety from the bylaw.
How does council feel about that?
I believe we already,
Made that decision? Okay. And, sorry, I'm just wondering, double check, did we have a motion to reflect that?
I'll move that.
Okay, seconded by? Councillor Cole? Any further discussion on that? Yep, go ahead, RCAO.
So if this is to remove CS2, and I'm not sure if it's a typo, we have resolution 239-2021, moved, seconded, and carried that the medical clinic property be removed from commercial services 2 to public 1. So that would have been, I'm not sure why the commercial services 2 was in there. So I'm just looking for some clarification that we don't have in
That was
CS2s.
that was the only property.
Okay.
Yep. That's
well, I
Councillor
could
Cole.
clarify if I made that. Property was a C1, so I think that's a typo.
Okay, thank you.
Was C1 and we agreed to move it to public.
Perfect, thank you.
I don't think we had any CS2 before or after this process. Just- I suggested.
Can I just get clarification, your worship, whether there was a motion involved in this or we were just discussing what had previously been decided?
Well, no, I think there
This
was
is a motion.
This is a motion, yeah, to remove the CS2 zone from the bylaw. And we had, who moved and seconded? Do we have any changes? I think it was Councillor Downey and Councillor Cole. Okay. Any further discussion on that? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Okay. Apologies to those on the line. I'm sitting in a bit of an awkward position, so if I take some time to get to you, if you have any questions, my apologies ahead of time. Okay, next we've got 9.5 marine pleasure commercial. You bring them, Kevin?
I didn't catch that.
We're looking at marine pleasure commercial, and so Councillor Cole would like to know if we have a map that can state where that is.
Yep, 1 second.
Thank you.
In the interim, if I may. So the way I look at the map, and obviously it's being brought up, but it looks like lease water. There's no land actually involved. So I guess we're saying we're okay with development on a dock or something.
I think that there's some uplands imperfected in that, or not getting to comment, but I think there's some uplands.
Kevin?
I'm madly pulling up a map.
Yeah.
So our marine pleasure commercial is this blue color here, which you can see. And can you see my cursor? It's in this location of the map.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so basically marine pleasure commercial, similar to marine recreational and marine industrial commercial, is water zoning. So it's specific to the water area. So you're correct, Councillor Cole. This is a water zoning, so no land is directly associated with this use or with this zone. This is a water zone to address the uses that occur on the surface of the water in those areas.
Go ahead, Councillor Coe.
Thank you, Mayor Whitson. So is that normal to have like a pub? Arena sounds normal, restaurant, but service establishment, retail store, even a taker suite out on a dock like that?
Yeah, it is common that you can see that in various areas throughout British Columbia where they'll allow those uses. Certainly. Great examples is Nanaimo. It's very common. And you see it occurring in Nanaimo where they do have restaurants on docks and things of that nature.
The kind of question the caretaker one. How the rest of council feels about
I do have a question regarding, so if this, is this currently in our bylaw?
Yes, it is. Yeah, this is an existing zone in your bylaw.
And so if somebody comes with a business plan and idea, do we have the ability to reject if it's in our zoning bylaw?
If it complies with the zoning bylaw, it complies with the zoning bylaw. Your only rejection could be through either building permit or development permit if you were to apply development permits to these areas. There's also they'd have to have approvals through capacity for infrastructure, so servicing. So if someone wanted to put a restaurant out on a dock in the area, they are going to have to prove out servicing, full servicing capacity, fire protection, all of those key technical components that go along with allowing any business to occur within your community.
Kevin, our map, when I review the map, it looks to me like the adjacent uplands are included in this marine pleasure commercial.
Yeah,
That's what that map is.
it's very, very difficult to tell based on this. I'd actually have to go back. Based on what I'm seeing, that is, even though that dark blue line is there, that I do not believe there's actually physical land associated with that area.
I'm not looking at the blue land, I'm looking at the color used for the MPC.
I sort of see it along the shore, like the brown is the sort of probably where the ferry is. And C1 is where the town office or the tourist bureau is. The boat launch is right next to that. There is an issue with the CAD, which I'll bring up at any time, but it's on the roll.
Councillor Mitchell?
Is it possible that we could simply specify in our bylaw that this is applicable only to the water-based activities? I mean, we're not going to rely on a crooked line drawn on a map by somebody's hand. We need to specify it, I think, a little more clearly, because it's on the pink area there, the blue line dips in, but I'm sure that wasn't on purpose. I'm sure that it was meant to be water only.
Can you clarify for us, Kevin?
Yeah, it can be specified in the purpose. As you can see here, each of these has a purpose, and we can specify specifically in that area.
One other question. Where that boundary comes out just past breakwater there, is that if somebody says, well, I'm going to set something up on the other side of that line, do we have anything to say about that, or is that completely out of our ballpark?
Do you mean in this area?
No, on the other side of the line, on the other side of the big black line.
Beyond it.
No, you have no authority over there because your jurisdiction does not extend beyond the black dotted line.
Got it, thank you.
So that zoning will be controlled through the regional district.
Councillor Coe?
Can I make a motion that we add under purpose 9.5 purpose? I don't know how you phrase that, to water use only or water-based activities, or do you have a suggestion, Kevin?
Something of that nature, and I'll wordsmith it to make sure that it captures exactly what we're looking for.
It's a little blurry on our end. Could you read that out, please?
Oh, I basically just added uses located on the water to the end of the purpose.
And you'll wordsmith that up. Okay.
And I'll wordsmith it to make sure that it,
Not sure I had a second there.
Seconder for that motion? Sorry, should have asked.
I'll second it.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried, okay?
Well, on that, bring up the something that, sorry, Kevin, can you bring up the map again, please?
yes, 100%.
Regretfully, when we were discussing C1, I only realized later, if you could blow up on that same area we were just looking at, please. Certainly appears to me that the CAB auto parts store and the helicopter place is not zone commercial 1 there. It looks like it's zone A1 rural. So I would like to propose that property there, zone C1. And I'm not sure if it was an oversight or why we would want it zoned A1 rural. Yeah, I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to second that, be appreciated.
Seconded by? Okay. Just want to read the two definitions. I think I agree with you. I just want to find the two. C1.
It's clearly part of our downtown core, and that's the intent of moving our zoning up.
So doing that doesn't put anybody into a legally non-conforming because I guess technically they're legally non-conforming right now if the crayon was in the right spot.
Through the chair, yeah, that'd be correct. This is existing zoning. So bringing it to a C1 zone would likely bring them into more compliance, although helicopter uses and things like that aren't permitted in the downtown zones either. So it would reflect, as Councillor Cole had mentioned, that this is more as viewed in the downtown versus being the sort of the agricultural sort of use or that natural resource use that has been identified in the adjacent areas.
C2 is all around the, well, no, we got rid of CS2,
Yes.
but C2 is all back past Hemlock Way.
Right. Oh, there we go. Whew. I don't know if you lost us too, but so the motion was for that area to be zoned C1. And was there a seconder? Sorry.
Councillor Downey, yes.
Great. Question?
Go ahead, Councillor Downey.
Currently, that location is a helipad site. What happens to that under C1? Because I suspect why C1 is due to the helicopter access.
Yeah, so if it's actually a helipad as defined under the Aeronautics Act, the town itself doesn't have any ability to actually zone that particular use out. Anything that approved under the Aeronautics Act, like an airport, like a thing like that, that falls under NRCan, can occur wherever they get approval. So if it's a helipad that's approved under that particular act of the federal government, they can have that helipad and that aerodrome in that location as long as they have the approval from the federal government. So it's not going to impact the ability for them to operate a helipad and a heliport from that location, whether it's C1 or another zone. What it will do is restrict any additional uses on those parcels to what's permitted specifically within the C1 zone.
Councillor Wolf?
Is there a way to find out, like, if they're part of the Aeronautics Act, or we don't know that just because seems to be a private helipad.
Yeah, if it's a helipad, for them to be legally landing and taking off from there, they'd had to have approval from the federal government through NRCan.
Yeah, I just want to make a point in A1 zoning, there's, no mention of helipad there.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. There isn't.
Any, sorry, Kevin?
From a zoning perspective, they'd be non-conforming, but as I said, the federal legislation that permits for airports and aerodromes trumps all provincial and municipal regulation.
Right. So this just tidies it up for future.
That would be correct. It'd be tidying it up for future.
So what about maintenance of helicopters? There's a hangar and maintenance that happens.
It really depends on how their definition of their aerodrome went, and if you care to get into the details of that specifically. In some instances, you find that when people establish a helipad aerodrome, they actually include their maintenance buildings in that for that exact purpose, to get around local government bylaws. Did they in this case? I don't know. I have never looked at this one in specific to know how it was defined in the case of this particular aerodrome.
So Kevin, my understanding on this process is we don't have to get it perfect right now. When it goes to second reading and you go and your job then is to notify everyone whose zoning changes, correct?
That would be the next step, yes.
And that's where they may come back and say, or where you could ask, just to confirm. Like, that's what they would say, that this would diminish our ability to be able to operate because of these reasons. And then when it came back, we would then consider that information from them or anybody, correct?
Yeah, you certainly can. The other consideration is, how long has this been operating in this location? And does the town want to address that particular issue, even because it's currently would be non-conforming under the existing zone anyway. So by changing the zone, it's still non-conforming under any new zone or historic zone. So if we take a step aside from the fact that we're changing the zoning, is the town in a position that they would want to enforce contrary to the particular use that's occurring there, because the zone currently doesn't match? So it comes down to, you cannot regulate out everything. You can regulate as best as you can, and you deal with these case-by-case scenarios on a case-by-case scenario. Zoning it to C1 doesn't change the fundamental existing use, but it does address the fact that this is seen as potentially being part of the downtown, and therefore should be zoned consistently with the rest of downtown. The fact that there's a non-conforming use on it is a separate issue from the zoning in this particular instance. If you wish to proceed with enforcement of the zoning, or attempt to, on a use that is non-conforming, it's a bit of a different discussion than changing the zone and the impacts of that, because it's already non-conforming use.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll call the question then. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's carried. Okay,
For clarity, I'm not too sure if that carried or not.
yes, it did.
Okay, thank you.
It is held by Midcoast Properties. The question I have is, how do we make it conforming? Or what do we do for a zoning? Because there is a hangar, there is maintenance that occurs there. We have helipads, in Campbell River, they've got a little finger there where they have them. It's not odd to have it near to your Chantel Port, but how do we make it?
Well, you'll find in Campbell River, almost every one of the helipads do not comply with zoning. I can confirm that. I used to work at the city of Campbell River and had major issues. That's why I know about aerodromes and helipads. And you'll find that almost all of them do not conform with the existing zoning. They've got through past the zoning through the Aeronautics Act and the establishment of an aerodrome. Just for clarity, and that includes the hospital helipad. That includes the helipads that are adjacent to the airport in Campbell River, and the helipads that fall within the I-2 zone and I-1 zones just outside of the city of Campbell River. And so it's a very common practice that this does occur. When these aerodromes do get approved, the federal government does consult with the local governments for conflict in that. And so when this aerodrome was established, the town would have been contacted by the federal government in that regard. Because they do want to make sure that it's not going to cause significant impacts on a community when these things are established.
Thank you. So there's no need to spend any time trying to put it into a category then?
I don't see a specific concern at this stage. I'd see a concern if they try to expand it beyond where it is that now, or if a significant use change occurs there potentially. But I don't see a major issue of trying to address the fact that there's an existing aerodrome there that's been in existence for a long time and will continue to be so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to item 10.0, industrial zones. So industrial M1 zone.
Through the chair, one of the notes I had taken early on when we were going through this was conversation that we had with the council in regards to auto body shop, auto repair shop. I do not believe I got specific direction to add this into the M1 zone, but it was just conversations that this is where this should be. And I just wanted to show that I'm proposing that this be added to the M1 zone, and just confirmation that that was part of the thoughts of council during our previous discussions.
Councillor Cole?
Yeah. Thanks for addressing that. But just so we know, by doing this, we're saying no auto body repair shops in C2, correct? It's not in C2 or auto repair. So it kind of goes to your point, Councillor Downey, like when do we start changing the rules to adapt the current uses? I'm okay with auto body shops being M1. I just want to make sure everyone is on the same page that we're excluding those from our downtown core and C2. Or do we all of a sudden add it into C2 because we happen to have an auto body shop that was M1 that's now C2?
Through the chair, that's an excellent conversation. And it comes down, we've been talking about this idea of intensity of use. So first off, auto body shop is fundamentally deemed an industrial use because of the noise and odors that emanate from it. Auto repair shops slightly different, and that's why you see auto repair shops being permitted incidentally to a principal use, such as a car dealership. We've had that conversation specifically. But with auto body repair, it is an industrial use. The chemicals that they use, the noise they produce, even the equipment they're required to be able to operate an auto body repair shop illustrates and suggests that it is fundamentally an industrial use.
I'll make a motion, if it's all right, that we add automotive body shops to M1.
The body shop or auto repair? Sorry?
In there.
It is, we haven't made a motion per se, official, but.
We don't need a motion?
Well, it's already in there, Ryan, so.
I guess, yeah, Kevin is looking for confirmation that's, we're all in agreement on that. The motion.
I'm sorry, I don't see it in my copy. I guess I must have an old copy.
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Mitchell. Yeah, this was one of the things that we added on, would have been, I can't remember which meeting, they're through discussion, so you may not have it in your copy specifically. This would have been added on a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, based on the conversations.
Okay, so a seconder for Councillor Mitchell's motion? Councillor Cole, okay, any other discussion on that?
I believe Council Mitchell just said auto body. Did you want to amend that to say auto repair shop as well? Council Mitchell,
Sure.
reflect the change that's already been made here.
So the top.
Auto body and auto repair, sure.
Just to confirm, Kevin, those are the two that you are looking for confirmation on?
That's correct, Chair.
Okay. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Carried. Okay. Any other questions on industrial M1? Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Wickham. Going back to aviation, so we don't have a definition of any sort of helicopter repair place. We have, I believe, one in the M1 zone. And if somebody comes to town and wants to set up a helicopter repair place or something, there's appears to be no definition or no principal use. So I would like to make a motion that I'm not sure what we would call helicopter repair or aviation facilities be included in M1 and the definitions.
I'll second it and ask for an amendment. Now we're talking aviation. This draft says auto, we have the heavy diesel shops, big trucks that are being worked on, equipment. Should it maybe just not say repair shops, period, rather than trying to find all the different types of equipment that can be repaired in that location? Aviation, we're talking about a hangar for storage and maintenance.
Yeah, I just think we're cleaning this up, so maybe we need heavy duty mechanic shops in there too, or to me, that's an auto shop.
I have a question though. So if somebody wants to put it, I mean, I guess they could drive all the parts in and do the work, but generally they do both. But they have parts flown in if they're going to be doing a painting or something like that. They have them driven in, but normally wouldn't they have them like fly the helicopter in to do maintenance? And then what I heard Kevin say earlier is that goes under the Aeronautical Act. So then we're out of the picture anyway. Is that correct, Kevin?
So the actual aerodrome being able to fly from a location is under the Aeronautics Act. Depending on how they define their aerodrome, sometimes they'll include their repair areas and things of that nature. To allow for sort of an aviation repair or something of that nature, certainly something we could look at. But that wouldn't automatically allow them to fly in and out of that location. It would just allow them to repair planes and or helicopters at that location. In this area, to be honest, the M1 zone really, from a planning perspective, isn't the location that makes sense for these kinds of uses. It really should be out at the old airport. However, if the town sees that there's a fundamental need for repair and that of aviation and aviation-related industry type things, it's something we certainly can look at, not something we reviewed. As for the heavy-duty auto mechanics, we do see that as falling under the auto repair shop. If town thinks there's a fundamental need to differentiate that from other auto repairs, we can certainly look at it. One of the goals was to try to keep the bylaw in a manner that's quite simple to administer. The more you start adding additional definitions, it causes creates clarity in some areas, but can cause confusion in others, right? So it's just one of those things. If we want to add definitions, we can certainly look at that, but we need to review the additional definitions in regards to the other definitions that we have in the bylaw.
Okay, follow, Councilor Coe?
So under your opinion, if somebody came and wanted to expand their helicopter facility or build a new one under M1, it wouldn't fall in that zoning.
It fundamentally depends on what they're proposing. If there's already an aerodrome established and that and it's running under the aerodrome, well, then they could, because it falls under federal jurisdiction. If they wanted to set up a new sort of repair shop for aviation purposes, but only repair shop, then it wouldn't fundamentally fall under the M1 zone at this time. But you're not going to be able to think of every potential use that someone might want to fit in an M1 zone, right? What I'd recommend in those cases, you deal with those in the case by cases when someone comes forward. Because you're not going to be able to think of every potential industrial use someone's ever going to want to do in your community. But if people have an idea, you'd be open to allow them to come forward to you as council to consider those uses to add it to the zone at the time that they wish to proceed.
I just say that it's not an idea. We have a helicopter, another one. We have two. We have one downtown and we have one in this area. But
Mhm.
by including it in here, if they want to expand, add another building, I don't know if they have a proper helipad or not. But we're saying no,
But
by
I,
not having it in here.
what I hear Kevin saying though is, okay, that's one thing. We have a lot of non-conforming. And there will probably in every municipality be non-conforming. So I guess the question is, do we, and some we're going to put in non-conforming because of the changes in the downtown core. So if we're worried about the one at the top non-conforming, then why, like then should.
In my opinion, it conforms. It's an industrial use. It's not different.
May I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
I think if we're gonna change the zoning, or make the zoning, make it clear in our zoning that we don't see a helicopter operation in our downtown core, that we need to provide a landing spot for them in our zoning. If in the event that somebody else comes along and they wanna open a heliport or whatever you wanna call it, so we say industrial M1, that's where we're gonna have it zoned. They can always apply to change something else, I suppose. But if we have no landing place, I guess my conclusion would be, I guess the town must think it's okay to have a helipad in the downtown core, helicopter establishment. And they may proceed with that misconception. So by zoning something clearly that's approved for that use, I think we're doing something sensible, even if there's never any demand, at least there's that option.
So I think we're in two different spots though, are we? Or, oh no, because you've asked to do that one M1. No, you've asked, no. So the one in the water, that one we voted on and that has already been addressed by changing it to C1 and acknowledging that it's not conforming. I think the M1 is now at the top of the hill, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
I
So
think
Councillor
Councilor
Mitchell-
Mitchell's
yeah.
point, if I may, is that by saying C1 downtown, we're essentially saying we don't want heliports downtown. So if somebody opens the book, where would they go? If the property downtown wants to redevelop into something totally different, where would they go?
What we're not talking about is the fact that there's aerodromes that are given approval for by the federal government. And that is something that we have in Fort McNeil. It's called the Fort McNeil Water Aerodrome. There is no permit that I can see going through the transport site that says the one up on Mine Road is an aerodrome.
So even
So they're
more reason.
operating, but they're, I don't know how they're operating because they're subject to